Every morning felt the same at Riverside Shopping Plaza. The sun would peek through the glass doors around 6 in the morning, and David would be there to unlock them. He'd been working as a security guard for 3 years now, and honestly, most days blurred together. Same routine, same faces, same everything. But there was something David noticed that nobody else seemed to care about. An old man walked past the plaza every single day. Rain or shine, hot or cold, he was there. David guessed he was probably in his late 70s, maybe early 80s. Hard to tell, really. The man always wore this brown coat that had seen better days. The fabric was faded, and you could tell it used to be a nice coat once, but time hadn't been kind to it. The thing that really got David's attention was how the old man moved. He had this wooden cane that he gripped with both hands, and every step looked like it took effort. His shoulders were hunched forward, and he shuffled more than walked. It was the kind of walk that made you realize just how hard getting old could be. Every day, without fail, the old man would make his way through the outdoor corridor of the plaza. Then he'd sit on the same bench right near the fountain that didn't work anymore. He'd sit there for exactly 15 minutes. David knew because he'd timed it once out of curiosity. 15 minutes on the dot. Then the old man would get up, grip his cane, and shuffle away down the street. The crazy part? Nobody noticed him. And David means nobody. He'd watched the security camera footage during slow shifts. Hundreds of people walked past that bench every day. Joggers in their fancy running shoes and wireless earbuds. Business people rushing to grab their morning coffee before heading to the office. Teenagers scrolling through their phones. Young mothers pushing strollers. Everyone was always going somewhere, always in a hurry, and they all walked right past the old man like he wasn't even there. It wasn't like he was causing any problems. He wasn't asking for money or bothering anyone. He just sat there, hands resting on his cane, staring at nothing in particular. Sometimes David would watch him on the monitors and wonder what he was thinking about. Did he have family? Where did he live? Why did he come here every day? David's coworkers never mentioned the old man. Not once. It was like he was invisible to them, too. "You see that elderly guy who sits on the bench every morning?" David asked Jake one day. Jake was another security guard who'd been working there for 5 years. Jake barely looked up from his phone. "What old guy?" "The one with the brown coat and the cane. Sits on the bench near the broken fountain." Jake shrugged. "Don't know who you're talking about, man. We get lots of people coming through here." That conversation stuck with David. How could someone be there every single day and still be completely invisible? It bothered him more than it probably should have. November rolled around and the weather turned cold. The kind of cold that gets into your bones and doesn't let go. David started wearing an extra layer under his security uniform, and he noticed his breath making little clouds in the early morning air. The old man still showed up. Same time, same bench, same routine. But now David could see him shivering. The brown coat wasn't thick enough for this kind of weather. The old man would sit there with his shoulders hunched even more than usual, hands trembling as they gripped the cane. Still, nobody stopped. Nobody asked if he was okay. Nobody even looked at him for more than a second. David couldn't stop thinking about it. At night, lying in bed, he'd picture that old man sitting alone in the cold. He thought about his own grandfather who'd passed away a few years back. Grandpa Joe had been lonely at the end, even though he tried not to show it. David wished he'd spent more time with him before it was too late. One particularly freezing morning, David made a decision. He was in the security office making his usual cup of coffee when he grabbed a second cup from the cabinet. He filled both cups, added some cream and sugar to one, and headed outside. His heart was beating faster than normal. Why was he nervous? It was just coffee. But something about breaking the routine, about actually acknowledging this person who everyone ignored, felt significant somehow. The old man was already on the bench. His hands were shaking and his lips had a slight blue tint to them. David walked over, his shoes making soft sounds on the concrete. "Morning, sir," David said, holding out the cup. "Thought you might want something warm." The old man looked up and David saw his eyes clearly for the first time. They were pale blue, watery, and filled with surprise. Complete and total surprise, like David had just done something absolutely shocking. For a long moment, the old man just stared at the coffee cup. Then he looked at David's face, then back at the cup. His hand slowly reached out, trembling even more now, and accepted the cup. "Thank you," the old man whispered. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it very often. "Thank you, young man." David noticed tears forming in the corners of those pale blue eyes, and it hit him hard. This wasn't just about coffee. This was about someone actually seeing him, acknowledging that he existed, treating him like a human being who mattered. "It's no problem at all," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Cold morning, right?" The old man nodded, wrapping both hands around the cup like it was the most precious thing in the world. He brought it close to his face, letting the steam warm his cheeks. David stood there for a moment, not quite sure what to do next. Should he stay and talk? Would that be weird? Should he just go back to work? "I'm here every morning around this time," David finally said. "If you ever want some coffee, just let me know." The old man looked up again, and this time there was something different in his expression. "Hope, maybe? Or gratitude? Or both? I'd like that very much," he said softly. David nodded and headed back to the security office. He glanced back once and saw the old man taking a small sip of coffee, still holding the cup with both hands, a slight smile on his weathered face. Something had just changed. David wasn't sure exactly what yet, but he knew that simple cup of coffee was the beginning of something important. As he walked back inside, he realized he didn't even know the old man's name. "Tomorrow," he'd ask. The next morning, David woke up 20 minutes earlier than usual. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was excitement, or maybe just curiosity. Either way, he found himself at the plaza extra early, preparing 2 cups of coffee before his shift officially started. When the old man arrived at his usual time, David was ready. He walked out with both cups, and this time the old man's face lit up when he saw him coming. "Good morning," David said, handing over the coffee. "Good morning to you," the old man replied, and his voice sounded a bit stronger today. "You actually remembered." "Of course I did," David said. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" The old man's eyes widened slightly, then he nodded and patted the bench beside him. David sat down, and for a moment they just sipped their coffee in comfortable silence. "I'm David, by the way," he said finally. "William," the old man said, extending a shaky hand. "William Hartley, though most people just called me Bill back in the day." They shook hands, and David noticed how thin William's fingers were, how papery his skin felt, but his grip was still there, still firm enough to mean something. "So William, I've seen you here every morning for months now. You live nearby?" William nodded. "About 6 blocks that way." He pointed down the street. "Small apartment. Just me and too many memories, you know." David didn't push for more. They talked about simple things. The weather. How the plaza had changed over the years. The fountain that used to work but broke down 2 years ago, and nobody bothered to fix. When William's 15 minutes were up, he stood slowly, gripping his cane. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, and there was hope in his voice that made David's chest feel tight. "Same time tomorrow," David confirmed, and that's how it started. Every single morning, David would bring 2 cups of coffee. Sometimes they'd talk for just a few minutes. Other times, when David's supervisor wasn't watching too closely, they'd talk for 20 minutes or more. David learned that William was 79 years old. He'd been married to a woman named Margaret for 52 years before she passed away. 5 years ago now. Cancer. It had been quick, which William said was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because she didn't suffer long. A curse because he didn't get enough time to prepare for life without her. "We did everything together," William said one morning, staring at his coffee. "Groceries, doctor's appointments, evening walks, everything. Then one day she was gone, and I had to learn how to be alone. I'm still learning, to be honest." David listened, really listened. He didn't interrupt or try to fix anything. He just let William talk. William told him about his son, Robert, who lived in Seattle. They didn't talk much anymore. Maybe twice a year, usually on William's birthday and Christmas. Sometimes Robert would forget even those. "He's busy," William said, but David could hear the hurt underneath. "Important job, family of his own." "I understand." But David wasn't sure William really did understand. Or maybe he understood too well, and that was the problem. As the weeks went by, David noticed changes. William started arriving a bit earlier, timing his walks so he'd get to the plaza right when David's shift started. He sat up a little straighter on the bench. His voice got stronger. He even smiled more, and David realized he had a nice smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. One day, William brought an old photograph. It was worn and faded, kept in a plastic sleeve in his coat pocket. That's Margaret, he said, showing David a picture of a woman with kind eyes and a bright smile. Taken on our honeymoon in 1972. We went to Niagara Falls. Neither of us had ever been anywhere fancy before. David looked at the photo, then at William. You could still see hints of the young man from the photo in William's face. The same eyes, the same gentle expression. She was beautiful, David said. She was everything, William replied quietly, carefully putting the photo back in his pocket, right over his heart. The other security guards started noticing David's routine. Jake was the first to say something. Why do you waste your time with that old guy? He asked one afternoon in the break room. He's just some random person. You're not getting paid to be his friend. David felt his jaw tighten. His name is William, and I'm not wasting time. I'm having coffee with someone who needs a friend. Jake rolled his eyes. Whatever, man. Just seems weird to me. But David didn't care what Jake thought. He cared that William was waiting every morning. He cared that their conversations had become the best part of his day. William told stories about his life, and they were incredible stories. He'd served in the Korean War when he was 19. He'd worked as a civil engineer and helped design bridges that people drove across every single day without knowing his name. He'd taught classes at the community college for years, helping young people learn about mathematics and structural design. I had a full life, William said one chilly morning. A really full life. Good career, wonderful wife, a son, friends. But somehow, somewhere along the way, it all just disappeared. Margaret died. My friends died or moved away. Robert got busy with his own life. And I woke up one day and realized I'd become invisible. David felt a lump in his throat. You're not invisible to me. William looked at him, and those pale blue eyes were shining again. No, he said softly. No, I'm not. And you have no idea what that means to me, David. You have absolutely no idea. But David was starting to understand. He was starting to see how easy it was for people to disappear, even when they were standing right in front of you. How loneliness could swallow someone whole. How a simple cup of coffee and 15 minutes of attention could mean everything to someone who'd been ignored for too long. The weather got colder as December approached. David brought William a spare scarf one morning, and William accepted it with tears in his eyes. It was just an old scarf David had in his car, nothing special. But William wore it every day after that. You've given me something I thought I'd lost, William said one morning. Purpose. A reason to get up and put on my coat and walk these 6 blocks, even when my knees hurt and my back aches. You've reminded me that I still matter. David didn't know what to say to that, so he just put his hand on William's shoulder and squeezed gently. They sat there on the bench, 2 people who might never have met if David hadn't decided to see someone everyone else ignored. And in that moment, both of them felt a little less alone in the world. Tuesday morning started like any other. David arrived at work at 5:45, made 2 cups of coffee, and waited. 6 o'clock came and went. Then 6:15. Then 6:30. William didn't show up. At first, David told himself not to worry. Maybe William had slept in. Maybe he had a doctor's appointment. Maybe he just decided to take a day off. People did that, right? But deep down, David knew something was wrong. In the 3 months they'd been meeting, William had never missed a single day. Not one. Rain, snow, ice, wind. William had been there every single morning without fail. David tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept wandering back to that empty bench. He checked the security cameras every few minutes, hoping to see that familiar brown coat and wooden cane coming around the corner. Nothing. By Wednesday morning, David was genuinely worried. William still hadn't shown up. The bench sat empty, and David found himself staring at it during his entire shift, drinking 2 cups of coffee by himself. Thursday came, and still no William. That's when David made a decision. During his lunch break, he pulled out his phone and found the crumpled piece of paper William had given him a few weeks back. On it was his address and a phone number for the building superintendent, just in case of emergencies. This is an emergency, David muttered to himself as he dialed the number. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. Riverside Apartments, this is Helen. Hi, my name is David. I'm calling about one of your residents, William Hartley, in apartment 3B. I'm a friend of his, and I haven't seen him in a few days. I'm worried something might be wrong. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Helen's voice came back, softer now. Oh, honey, Mr. Hartley had a medical emergency. He collapsed in his apartment on Monday evening. His neighbor heard a thud and called 911. David's stomach dropped. Is he okay? Where is he? He's at Riverside General Hospital. I don't know which room, but that's where the ambulance took him. David thanked her and hung up. He looked at the clock. His shift ended at 3. He'd never been so eager for the day to end. The moment 3 o'clock hit, David practically ran to his car. The hospital was only 10 minutes away, but it felt like the longest drive of his life. He kept thinking about William sitting alone in a hospital room. Did he have anyone with him? Did Robert even know his father was in the hospital? At the hospital, David went straight to the information desk. I'm looking for William Hartley. He was admitted a few days ago. The woman typed on her computer. Room 412, 4th floor. Are you family? David hesitated for just a second. Yes, he lied. I'm his grandson. The elevator ride up felt eternal. David's heart was pounding. What if William was really sick? What if it was serious? Room 412 was at the end of a long hallway. The door was partially open. David knocked softly and pushed it open. William was in the bed closest to the window. He looked so small lying there, surrounded by machines and tubes. His face was pale, and he seemed to have aged 10 years in just a few days. An IV drip was connected to his arm, and a monitor beeped steadily beside him. David stepped into the room quietly. William's eyes were closed. William, David said softly. The old man's eyes fluttered open. For a moment he looked confused, like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Then recognition dawned on his face and his entire expression transformed. David? His voice was weak and raspy. Is that really you? Yeah, it's me, David said, pulling a chair close to the bed. You scared me, old man. 3 days and no coffee? I thought maybe you'd found a better coffee buddy. William tried to laugh, but it turned into a cough. When he caught his breath, his eyes were watery. You came. You actually came to see me. Of course I came. Where else would I be? William's thin hand reached out and David took it gently. Nobody's visited, William whispered. 3 days in this room and you're the first person to come through that door who isn't being paid to be here. David felt anger rise in his chest. What about Robert? Does your son know you're here? William nodded slowly. The hospital called him. He said he'd try to come this weekend if he could get away from work. The way William said it made it clear he didn't expect Robert to actually show up. What happened? David asked. Dizzy spell, William explained. Fell in my kitchen. Hit my head on the counter on the way down. They say I was on the floor for about 6 hours before my neighbor found me. Dehydration, they said. Low blood pressure. A bunch of medical terms that basically mean I'm old and falling apart. David squeezed his hand. You're going to be okay though, right? They want to keep me a few more days for observation. Make sure there's no bleeding in the brain, monitor my heart, all that fun stuff. William's eyes met David's. But I will be okay, especially now that you're here. They talked for over an hour. David told William about work, about the plaza, about how empty the bench looked without him there. William talked about how boring hospital food was and how the nurse kept waking him up in the middle of the night to check his vital signs. But underneath the casual conversation, David could sense something deeper. A loneliness that went beyond just being physically alone. William had lived a whole life, contributed to society, raised a family, and yet here he was in a hospital room with no one caring enough to visit. You know what the hardest part of getting old is? William said quietly, staring at the ceiling. It's not the aching joints or the medications or even knowing your time is limited. It's becoming irrelevant. It's realizing that the world has moved on without you, and nobody notices whether you're there or not. David shook his head. I notice. I noticed when you weren't at the bench. I noticed and I was worried sick about you. You're different, David. You actually see people. Most folks your age, they walk around with their faces in their phones, completely disconnected from the world around them. But you see people. Really see them. A nurse came in to check William's vital signs, so David stepped out into the hallway. He pulled out his phone and did something he probably shouldn't have. He searched online for William's son, Robert Hartley, in Seattle. Found a work number for a tech company, he called it. This is Robert Hartley, a professional voice answered. Hi, Mr. Hartley. My name is David Chen. I'm a friend of your father's. I'm calling from Riverside General Hospital. There was a pause. Is something wrong? The hospital already called me. They said he was stable. He is stable, physically. But Mr. Hartley, your dad is alone in this hospital room. He's been here 3 days and I'm the only person who's come to see him. Another pause, longer this time. When Robert spoke again, his voice was defensive. I have a job. I have responsibilities. I can't just drop everything and fly across the country every time. He's your father, David interrupted, his voice harder than he intended. And he's lonely. He sits on a bench every morning at a shopping plaza, just to feel like he's part of the world. Do you know how sad that is? The line went quiet. David could hear Robert breathing on the other end. I'll see what I can do, Robert finally said and hung up. David stood in the hallway for a moment, his hands shaking slightly. Then he took a deep breath and went back into room 412. William was still awake, looking at him with those pale blue eyes. I'm going to come visit you every day until they release you, David said. And when you get out, we're still having coffee every morning. Deal? William smiled. The first real smile David had seen since entering the room. Deal. David kept his promise. Every single day after his shift ended, he went straight to the hospital. He'd bring William coffee from the good cafe near the plaza, the one that made it just right. Sometimes he'd bring a newspaper or a magazine. Other times he'd just bring himself and stories about his day. On the third day of visit, something unexpected happened. David walked into room 412 and found William sitting up in bed talking on a video call. The tablet was propped up on his lap, and David could see a younger man on the screen. David, come here, William said, his face brighter than David had seen in days. Robert, this is David, the young man I told you about. David walked over, feeling awkward. Robert looked to be in his mid-40s, wearing a button-down shirt, sitting in what looked like a home office. Hi, David said with a small wave. Thank you, Robert said, and his voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for being there for my dad. For calling me. For making me see. He trailed off, shaking his head. I'm flying out tomorrow. I should have done it days ago. After the call ended, William was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and squeezed David's arm. You did that. You made my son realize he still has a father. I just told him the truth, David said. Sometimes that's exactly what people need to hear. Word started spreading at the plaza about David's daily hospital visits. At first it was just Jake making comments in the break room. Still visiting that old guy? Man, you're really committed to this. But then something shifted. David noticed one of the coffee shop workers, Linda, saving leftover sandwiches at the end of her shift. When he asked her about it, she shrugged. There's a woman who sleeps near the north entrance sometimes. I figured if you can take time to care about that old man, I can make sure she doesn't go hungry. Food's just gonna waste anyway. A few days later, Tom, the parking lot attendant, started helping elderly shoppers carry their bags to their cars. Saw what you've been doing, he told David. Made me think about my own grandma. I should call her more. Even the assistant manager, Patricia, got involved. She organized a coat drive for the upcoming winter, setting up a donation box in the main corridor. You started something here, David, she said. People are paying attention now. Really paying attention. David hadn't meant to start anything. He just wanted to have coffee with a lonely old man. But somehow that simple act was creating ripples he never expected. William was released from the hospital after 6 days. David helped him get home, carrying his small bag of belongings up 3 flights of stairs to his apartment. It was the first time David had been inside. The apartment was small but tidy. Everything was old but well-maintained. Pictures covered every surface. William and Margaret through the years, frozen in moments of happiness. Their wedding day, vacations, birthdays, a whole life documented in frames. Margaret always said we needed to print photos, William said, noticing David looking at them. Said if we only kept them on computers, we'd never actually look at them. She was right about that, like she was right about most things. David helped William settle into his recliner. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed in on you. Robert's coming this weekend, William said. He's bringing his wife and the kids. I haven't seen my grandchildren in almost 2 years. That's great, William. It is. William paused. But you know what? Even if he wasn't coming, I'd be okay. Because I have you. You've reminded me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up. Over the next few weeks, David started coming to William's apartment instead of meeting at the plaza. William wasn't quite strong enough for the walk yet. They'd have coffee in the small living room. playing chess on an old board that had belonged to Margaret's father. William taught David about the game, about strategy and patience. Chess is like life, he'd say. You have to think several moves ahead, and sometimes the most powerful pieces are the ones nobody's paying attention to. David learned more about William's past. He'd grown up poor in a small town, joined the military because it was his only way to get an education, came home from war and met Margaret at a church social, built a life from nothing. "I designed 3 major bridges in this city," William said one evening, moving his knight across the board. "Thousands of people cross them every single day. They have no idea who built them, and that's okay. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it needed to be done." "That's a good way to look at things," David said. "You understand that already. You didn't help me for recognition. You did it because it needed to be done." When Robert finally visited, David made sure to give them space. But William insisted he come by for dinner one evening. It was awkward at first. Robert was clearly dealing with guilt, and William was trying too hard to make everything seem fine. But as the evening went on, things relaxed. Robert's kids, 2 teenagers who'd been glued to their phones, started asking William questions about his life. He told them about the war, about building bridges, about their grandmother. Before they left, Robert pulled David aside. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I let work become an excuse. I convinced myself Dad was fine on his own. I didn't want to see that he was lonely because it was easier not to see it. What matters is you're seeing it now," David said. "I'm going to do better. We're planning to come visit every few months, and I'm calling him twice a week minimum." He shouldn't have needed a stranger to remind his own son to be present. "I'm not a stranger anymore," David said with a small smile. "No," Robert agreed. "I guess you're not." As the weeks turned into months, William got stronger. Eventually, he was well enough to return to their morning routine at the plaza. The first day back, William walked up to that bench with David beside him, and several people stopped to say hello. The coffee shop worker, the parking attendant, even Patricia, the assistant manager. "Welcome back, Mr. Hartley," Patricia said warmly. "We miss seeing you here." William looked at David with amazement. "They know my name?" "Of course they do," David said. "You're not invisible anymore." That evening, William called David. His voice sounded strange, formal almost. "I need to talk to you about something important," he said. "Can you come by tomorrow evening?" David felt worry creep into his chest. "Is everything okay? Is it your health?" I'm fine," William assured him. I've been thinking about some things, important things, and I need to discuss them with you." David agreed, though he spent the whole next day wondering what could be so serious. When he arrived at William's apartment that evening, he found the old man sitting at his small dining table, papers spread out in front of him. "Sit down, David," William said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We need to talk about the future." David sat down at William's dining table, his heart beating faster than it should. The papers spread across the table looked official, the kind of documents that meant serious business. "You're making me nervous." "William," David said, trying to keep his tone light. William folded his hands on the table, and David noticed they weren't shaking as much anymore. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the hospital. About my life, about what matters, about what I want to leave behind." "William, let me finish, please," the old man said gently. "I'm 79 years old, David. I've had a good long life. But the last 5 years since Margaret died, I was just existing, going through the motions, waiting really without even realizing what I was waiting for." David stayed quiet, letting him continue. "Then you came along with a cup of coffee and treated me like I mattered, like I was still a person worth knowing. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." William's voice cracked slightly. "You gave me my dignity back. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. William, you don't need to thank me. I'm not thanking you." "Well, I am. But that's not why we're having this conversation." William pushed some papers across the table. "I've updated my will. I've been meeting with my lawyer for the past few weeks." David's stomach dropped. "William, no. Whatever you're thinking. I don't have much family, David. Robert has his own life, his own money. He's doing well for himself. He doesn't need what I have. But you're working as a security guard, living paycheck to paycheck, right?" David felt his face flush. "I'm doing okay. Don't be proud right now. Just listen." William tapped the papers. "Margaret and I, we saved our whole lives. We lived simply. The apartment is paid off. We had good retirement accounts. Between everything, there's about $180,000. David felt like he couldn't breathe. William, I can't. You can and you will. But there's something else. William pulled out another document, this one handwritten in his shaky script. This is a letter I wrote. Instructions, really. This money isn't just for you to spend on yourself. It's for others, too. People like me, the invisible ones. David's hands trembled as he picked up the letter. William's words blurred as tears filled his eyes, but he could make out enough to understand. You want me to help other lonely seniors? I want you to make them visible again, William said. The way you made me visible. I've been thinking about all those people out there, sitting alone in their apartments, going days without talking to another human being, eating dinner by themselves every night. Nobody calling, nobody visiting. Just waiting to die. William's voice was passionate now, more alive than David had ever heard it. You have something special, David. You see people, really see them. This money, this is my chance to help you do that for others. Start something. A program, a foundation, whatever you want to call it. Bring people together. Let them know they still matter. David put the letter down, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it came out rough. You're not dying, William. You're getting stronger every day, I know, and I hope I have years left. But we both know I'm in the final chapter. When I do go, I want to leave something good behind, something that continues helping people even when I'm not here anymore. They sat in silence for a while. David looked around the small apartment, at all the photos of William and Margaret, at the life they'd built together. He thought about that empty bench at the plaza, about how many other empty benches there were in the world. I don't know how to start something like that, David finally said. You already started it, William pointed out. You started it with a cup of coffee. Everything else will follow. Over the next few months, David couldn't stop thinking about William's proposal. He did research during his breaks at work. He learned about senior isolation, about how it was an epidemic that nobody talked about. Millions of elderly people living alone, going days or weeks without meaningful human contact. The statistics were heartbreaking. Loneliness in seniors led to depression, cognitive decline, even earlier death. It was a health crisis hiding in plain sight, affecting the people society had decided were no longer useful. David started small. He talked to Patricia at the plaza about using some empty office space. She was immediately supportive. We have that old storage room on the second floor, she said. It's been sitting empty for 2 years. If you clean it out, you can use it. David spent his days off transforming that dusty storage room into a welcoming space. William came to help, directing more than lifting, but his presence made everything feel possible. They put out the word through local community centers and churches. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, seniors were invited to the plaza for coffee and conversation. No agenda, no structured activities, just a place to be around other people. The first meeting, only 3 people showed up. But David and William were there, making coffee, sharing stories, making everyone feel welcome. By the second month, 15 people were coming regularly. By the third month, they had to find a bigger space. The local newspaper heard about what David was doing and sent a reporter. The story that came out was titled, "Security Guard Simple Act of Kindness Sparks Community Movement." David's phone started ringing. Other shopping centers wanted to know how to start similar programs. Churches asked for advice. Community centers wanted partnerships. William was there for all of it, beaming with pride. See, he'd say, I knew you had something special. But more importantly, people were being seen again. David met Clara, an 82-year-old former teacher who hadn't had a real conversation in 6 months. He met George, a veteran who spent every day alone in his apartment watching TV. He met Ruth, whose children had moved across the country and forgot to call. And slowly, all of them started coming back to life. They made friends. They laughed. They shared stories. They mattered again. One morning, almost a year after that first cup of coffee, David and William sat on their usual bench at the plaza. The morning gathering had just ended, and they could hear laughter still echoing from the second floor. You know what the best part is? William said, sipping his coffee. What's that? I'm not special anymore. I'm not the only one being seen. We're all being seen now. That's how it should be. David smiled. You'll always be special to me, old man. And you'll always be the grandson I got to choose, Walter, William replied. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the world go by. People walked past, but now some of them stopped to say hello. Some asked about the next gathering. Some shared their own stories of loneliness and connection. The bench wasn't empty anymore. Neither were the lives of the people who'd found their way to it. 3 years later, the Hartley Visibility Project had expanded to 12 locations across the city. David had quit his security job to run it full-time. Hundreds of seniors had found community, friendship, and purpose through the program. William lived to see all of it. He passed away peacefully in his sleep at 83, with David holding his hand and Robert sitting on his other side. At his funeral, the church was packed. Not just with family, but with all the people whose lives he'd touched through David. Clara was there. George was there. Ruth was there. Dozens of seniors who'd found their way back to visibility stood to share stories about how the program had saved their lives. The plaza installed a bronze plaque on the bench where it all started. It read simply, "In memory of William Hartley, everyone deserves to be seen." Every morning, David still goes to that bench. He still brings 2 cups of coffee, though now one is for whoever needs it that day. And he still remembers the most important lesson William ever taught him. The invisible people aren't invisible at all. We just need to open our eyes and look. Because sometimes changing someone's entire world starts with something as simple as a cup of coffee and the willingness to see them. Really see them. And in doing so, we become visible to ourselves too, reminded of our own humanity and our capacity to make a difference. William was right about one thing. David did have something special, but it wasn't anything complicated or extraordinary. It was just the simple, radical act of paying attention, of caring, of showing up, and that, it turns out, can change everything.